wanted to just give you that bit of perspective. Because as long as the argument is solely about industry-related issues attached to health insurance, we don't get to the bottom line issue. And so it's very important that we step back and think about what the bottom line issue happens to be. These major debates go all around the Mayberry bush, and they don't get up in the bush, right? These major debates typically have been a lot of rhetoric. And that rhetoric, again, becomes a political argument. And I am not naive. I understand politics. I understand politics is who gets what, when, where, why, and how. But at some point, we've got to step up to the reality of what this set of circumstances actually means. So let's step back for just a second to our reason for coming today and for celebrating Community Partners for Better Health. One of the things I think is you've got to ask yourself what the role is. And because I can't throw all this stuff out off the top of my head, at some point I will be able to do so, I'm going to do what I typically don't do when I present. So I'm going to give you some stats, which I'm going to read. And I'm going to give you some positioning, which I'm going to read. But at this point, before I start reading, I just want to ask again, what is the role that Community Partners for Better Health actually plays? Now, you heard a voice that must be heard. That's the thing, right? A voice that must be heard. And that voice needs to be heard on health education. It must be heard on health education. It must be heard on health messaging, just general messaging about health and health care, what's appropriate in that respect. It has to be heard on eliminating health disparities. And they are many, and they are huge disparities. So wellness is key. So when we think about, again, Community Partners for Better Health, prevention of chronic disease becomes one of those musts relative to the voice. Lifestyle changes for people who need to understand that those are going to be critical to whether or not they continue to walk around on this earth. Preventative care, where you step up and you're preemptive about your own set of circumstances and you create the capacity to be around here a longer time. Not only to be around, but again, we're going to talk about this thing of being a voice that has to be heard. And then, this whole idea of outreach to the underserved. So very often we lose construct relative to the underserved. The construct of that. How is that built? How is that made? So I would tell you that the conversation that we have been hearing relative to healthcare has been such a highbrow conversation that it doesn't get back to where the costs are coming from, where the synergies are potentially, and where, quite frankly, I believe the answers, more likely than not, are. So, as one of the senior executives in my company, I can pontificate and I can spout off and I can chest pound and become egomaniacal and talk about all the things that are critical to this business and not talk to my colleagues who are paying my salary because they're engaging you guys. What you have in front of you comes from them. I just walked in, right? Do you think they have a perspective on what it takes for you to enjoy yourselves here that takes them well beyond what I would think? They do. The same thing holds true when we start to talk about this whole issue of healthcare disparities. So I want to go back to English class a little bit. Can we do that? Who remembers English class? All right, everybody does. So we're going to go back, and we're going to talk about voice. Remember when your English teacher took you through this issue of voice? Voice. A voice that must be heard. So let's talk about voice for a second. Voice is a form of verb that indicates the actions taken by the subject. Voice. Now, when we think about that, we can come back and say, what is the kind of voice that we have, that we want to have? And we have both of these. Active voice. The hunter killed the bear.
Okay.
That's using active voice. Remember that from English class?
Yeah.
Passive voice. The hunter was killed by the bear. Active voice. The hunter killed the bear. Passive voice. The hunter was killed by the bear. Who's the bear? Healthcare disparities? So let's think about it for a second. So in the active voice, it's focused on the hunter's approach to engaging the bear. And the passive voice is focused on the bear. In the active voice, the emphasis is on the subject taking action. So let's put Community Partners for Better Health into that subject category for taking the action. The passive voice, the emphasis is on the subject receiving the action. So I will tell you that one of the things you learn when you're talking about business communications is you learn to communicate in the active voice, because the active voice begets activity. It begets whatever the focus is that you create, that you're going to attach to your subject matter. So when we talk about active voice, we now begin to understand that the subject really needs to focus on the direct object in that sentence to drive the outcome. So if Community Partners for Better Health is going to not only be a voice that must be heard, but if it's going to set the example, set the predicate for how we ought to think about what we're doing, not